Alright. Alright, so now we have our ingredients for the bread. We now have to go through the steps of actually baking the bread, or making it and baking it. Alright, so we have our flour, water, salt, yeast, all mixed up, ready to go. The next thing we need to do is knead the dough. Alright, so kneading is what you imagine, right? You're stretching it out, then you're folding it over, you're stretching it together, you're folding it out, stretching it over. Folding, folding, folding. The point of kneading the dough kneading strengthens the gluten network. And pushes some air into the dough. So it traps more air between the gluten network that it has some space to rise. Alright, so now we've kneaded the dough. We're going to you're going to let the dough rise. The yeast cells in the dough are going to eat the sugar. And produce some carbon dioxide, which causes the dough to literally rise. That's what the puffiness is from, carbon dioxide filling up those air pockets. Just like every other organism, works slightly better when it's warm. Which is why when you let the dough rise, you usually put it like near the oven or on top of the oven or like near an air vent so that it gets some heat, so that it does a better job of rising. You know you're done when the dough has doubled in size. So usually you tamp down the dough into your bowl, put a towel over it, let it warm up, let it go for, depending on how long or how much yeast you put in there, right? A few hours, maybe overnight. The dough will have doubled in size by the time the yeast is done doing its job. I always forget, no one else in this classroom. Like none of the other teachers use this classroom. We use the projector, so I forget that they don't have it pulled down on me. Alright, so then you've let your dough rise, now we're ready to bake it. Right, typically you're going to place it in the oven. Let it bake, depending on all the ingredients, going to bake like 15 minutes up to an hour, depending on, are you doing like little rolls, are you doing like a whole loaf of bread, are you doing 2 loaves of bread. The tricky thing about an oven, I don't know if you've ever watched your oven, it cycles, and so you'll hear it click on, and it gets hot, and you hear it click off, and it cools off. Or sometimes there's a little light on the front that like turns on and off. You ever notice on our hot plates, there's a little light in the front and the light turns on and off? It's because it's heating up. And then it gets, so if you set your oven at 350, the oven's actually heating up to 400 and then cooling off to 325. And heating up to 400 and then cooling off to 325. Over and over again. So on average, the oven's around 350. And so it's not great for bread. Bread would prefer to just be baked at one solid temperature. Now, ovens typically cycle. So they'll get purposely too hot and then cool off. So if you want a really great baked bread, what you would do is you would put it in a ceramic baking casserole kind of dish, but the ceramic retains its heat much better. So instead of just having the air trying to retain heat, and we already talked about the fact that air does a terrible job of maintaining its temperature, a ceramic stone, which is why you use a pizza stone, right? If you're making pizza in your oven, you use a pizza stone. The ceramic stone that you put pizza on stays one temperature all the time. And so the bottom of the pizza gets more evenly baked if you use a pizza stone. Same thing if you use a ceramic what do I want to call this? Baking, I'm forgetting the word. We'll call it, yeah, like stoneware would be ceramic. We're just going to call it, sure, container, since I don't know what word I'm looking for. Dish? Yeah, dish. That's what it is, dish. Yeah, pot, something, whatever you want. Not stone. It has to have sides and a lid, whatever you call that. So, anyway, those do a better job of baking your bread or your pizza, right? So next time you make a frozen pizza, if you have a ceramic stone, the crust gets more evenly heated all the way through, and you should avoid the part where like the crust is super done, but towards the middle of the pizza it's still kind of raw and doughy. Happens to me all the time. We don't have a ceramic pizza stone, so that's why we just get Little Caesars hot and ready. You should just drive through. That way I just have to roll down my window and pizza comes in through the window. It's like magic. We just bought the, so this week, we always get pizza on Monday, Pizza Monday, it's our house. And so Little Caesars now has the pretzel crust pizza. I mean, it is good, as long as you're not comparing it to regular pizza.
Yeah, does it have like a cheese sauce?
Yeah, so it has nacho cheese sauce instead of red sauce. And then it has pepperoni on it. And then it has pretzel crust, and it has like the rock salt you find on pretzels. So it's not bad, it's just different. Like my husband and I were like, I mean, it was tasty, but if I'm thinking pizza, this is not going to be my go-to pizza. It's a fun novelty, but it's only $6. And so as a trade-off, it's not terrible for a $6 pizza. So. Alright, so let's talk about everything else you can make with flour. Not really everything else. Alright, thin batters, thick batters, and some history. Alright, so thin batter. So everything up to this point has been dough. So batters have more water than flour. In fact, it has 2 to 4 times more water than flour. Since it has so much water, it prevents the gluten from forming strong network or strong cross-linking. So things that are thin batters are things like pancakes. So when you buy your instant pancake mix, it has a chemical leavener in it. So it has either baking powder or baking soda in it. Right, so most pancake instant mixes, right, you just have to add water. Because everything else is in it. So a little bit of sugar's in it, your chemical leavener's in it, a little bit of salt you need, all in it already. Alright, you're going to mix it once, obviously get the water to mix up with the mix, but then you also need to mix it long enough so you get some air incorporated into the pancake mix. If you just did the bare minimum of mixing, your pancakes will be kind of flat. If you mix them up a lot, you get kind of fluffier pancakes. And the same thing, when it's like fluffy pancake mix versus original, it's the amount of chemical leavener that's in there, how much carbon dioxide gets made. Alright, so then you pour the batter onto the griddle, and what happens when you put pancake batter on the griddle? Well, it spreads a little bit, right, and then how do you know when to flip it over? The bubbles, carbon dioxide from your chemical leavener. So it's not air bubbles, that's carbon dioxide bubbling out. So when it stops bubbling, all the chemical leavener has been used up. So you know to flip it over. Fluffy it's going to get. There you go, there's a fun fact for Thanksgiving breakfast day. You say, hey guys, there's bubbles, carbon dioxide. How you know it's chemical leavener. Trying to have like icebreakers with the people you're going to see at Thanksgiving. Things you can like start generic conversations with.
Look at that chemical reaction,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah. So when you're standing around awkwardly with other people in the kitchen.
Like reassure your parents you're doing something at college.
Yes, that's also part of it, because for sure your relatives, not so much your parents, they know what you're doing, but like the aunt, uncle, like every time I go home, my parents were the only people who went to college in our family, so his 6 brothers and sisters didn't go, and so they always have questions like, so when you were in college, like, so for real, there's only one bathroom down the hall? That's your fact, there's only one bathroom down the hall. Or, what kind of stuff are you learning? This would be much easier to explain than probably what you're doing, unless history, I guess you could say, hey, we covered history
I'm learning how late I can get up before my 8 a.m.
That's also a good life skill, I guess, how fast you get dressed.
How long? I'm learning how much time, how little time I can take to get from my bed to my 8 a.m. class.
See, useful life skill. So, be prepared. There's going to be lots of people over Thanksgiving who'll be like, so what are you learning? Have 1 or 2 fun facts you can throw out.
How long I can disappear before people start to wonder if I'm alive.
Alright, I don't like pancakes. My go-to is waffles. I always prefer waffles over pancakes.
You like the little
I like the little holes. Yeah. They
stuff.
hold stuff.
Pancakes absorb it into it.
Yeah, it's sticky and weird.
But waffles
Yeah.
just held on top.
Well, you have to strategically butter so you don't get butter in every square. Yeah, it takes a little bit more work. I usually just fill up every square with whipped cream. That's kind of my go-to thing. That way I don't have to do butter and syrup, just all whipped cream. Yeah. And I'll use Cool Whip most of the time.
Pancakes go up the syrup really too fast. By the time you get to them, you have to have the syrup on the side, otherwise you get
Gets soggy.
Like both is over equal. You go to pick up a pancake and they fall apart. Pick up a waffle.
Structural
All
integrity.
the serving is going to be a straight waffle. It's not falling apart.
I don't know. You get some holes. Oh, we went to Waffle House much later, and you just dump the whole thing of syrup on the waffle.
The waffle doesn't break.
It was like a soupy syrupy waffle. It was really good.
Alright, so when you make your pancake mix, right, you just add water. When you do waffles, you use the same batter. You have to add a little bit more water. If anyone remembers the other ingredient you have to add. You may not have made waffles lately. You have to add oil. Now that oil is part of the reason why it gets crispy. That fat cooks quickly, right, and crisps up compared to a pancake that has almost no fat. It's a softer batter than the waffle. The other thing is obviously you make a waffle iron, right, the waffle iron. I think Megan should probably bring some waffles. Real waffles? I have a toaster.
We're not allowed to have toasters.
That sounds awful.
Abby clearly cannot toasters. She's like really
Alright, now let's turn this off. Alright. Oh.
Yeah, most of them already caught on fire once this year. That's not really good. Ours is at totally dry. Every time you turn it on. It's kind of
Alright, so waffle mix is different because you are going to spread it thinner than you would pancake mix. Because of the extra water, it's going to pour easier, it's going to be a much thinner batter. And then you end up cooking it quickly between the two waffle irons, right? So a pancake you cook on one side, then you flip it over, you cook it. Waffle irons, you cook both sides at the same time. And so it's cooked really, really fast. And because it's cooked so fast and has the extra oil, you get the crispy edges and the soft center. If you did not add the oil, or you didn't have enough water, you will steam your waffles. And it'll be more like microwaving an Eggo, right? Where they are, you know, they have the right shape, but they're just kind of squishy all around. They don't have that kind of hard edge. Just
My mom used to make waffles and put Sprite, like the vacuum,
Sprite in the waffles?
yeah.
I cannot think it would be sugarier. Like if she's using it instead of water. Yeah, if she substitutes the Sprite for the water, then it would make a sweeter waffle.
What about orange and chocolate?
Yeah. You could, I would say if you guys want to do that as your video demo and talk about different waffle ingredients and how they make different types of waffles, that would also be an option.
Hey, they have a limited 2 waffle irons at Spring Grove.
Hey, this one's better on one.
Yeah, so if you wanted to see what the ratios of water to oil to other, because the issue I usually have is I usually try to add fruit, and the fruit adds too much water to the batter, and then it ends up steaming. I should add more oil. Like if you're going to throw in like blueberries or whatever, they're going to add some extra water, and I always forget to compensate by adding a little bit of oil, and so they end up being kind of crispy, kind of squishy. Delicious, but not as nice as would be if they were all oil. Like chocolate chips, when you add them, add a lot of oil and no water, so the chocolate chip waffle comes out perfect every time. Very crispy. So, you can do some experimenting on your own. I think a waffle iron would be okay in your dorm room. Not. It would be super messy. So. Alright, so that was thin batters. Let's talk about some thick batters. Alright, so it's going to have less water than a thin batter, and you're not usually going to add any water. You usually add an egg, and the egg has enough water in it, that is the water that you're going to be adding to it. So the cake is obviously the most common thick batter. There's like a splash. Usually just a little bit. Depends on how many eggs they're asking you to add. Yeah, the egg-water ratio. And it really depends. You could add 2 eggs, and that would make up for it, and it'd be fluffier. Depends on what kind of density of cake you're looking for. So, when we do our cookie experiment, I guess in 3 weeks now, 2 weeks. Wherever the week of Thanksgiving is. Is that 3 weeks or 2 weeks away? Yeah, that is, we're going to look at how the egg to water ratio affects your cookie. I was just going to do chocolate chip cookies. It could be just plain sugar cookies, but, well, they all have to be the same. Whatever we choose, everyone has to make the same kind, otherwise you don't have a control. Right, like one group makes just regular recipe, one group doubles the egg, one group switches out the fat for applesauce, one group, there will be a control group that makes just plain, regular. We're going to swap out the flour for rice flour, see how that turns out. Add a little dancing going. So, we'll see. It's going to be like, I think I have, No, they'll all be edible unless you got screwed up.
The edible.
Wait,
But
hold on, hold
theory.
on. The same way the boiled eggs were edible.
I didn't say those were edible. I said you could eat them. But if you notice, I didn't eat any of them.
I didn't think it was gonna be that bad.
Yeah. Yeah. The cheese turned out okay.
Yeah, the
Right?
cheese was
The cheese
great.
turned out okay. Since there you guys skipped a step. Still turned out.
Skipped a step?
Yeah, it said refrigerate 10 minutes.
Oh.
You guys went right for it.
I was so hungry.
Alright. Alright, oh, lost my train of thought. Alright, so you're going to make your cake with flour, eggs, sugar, and oil or fat of some sort. Alright, so we're going to talk about American cakes because they are different than what you would find in other countries. Like when you think cake in America, right, you're thinking white cake that's kind of fluffy and soft and kind of squishy. Like you can put your finger into it and kind of bounce it back. That is a American cake. That is not true for European cakes. European cakes are much denser. But we're going to use shortening of some sort. Right. Crisco is like the go-to shortening. Yeah, well, right, it's that fully hydrogenated vegetable oil.
I've never seen anyone put Crisco.
Because it's usually already in the mix.
Like, wait, and like a cake from scratch?
Oh no, cake from scratch, depends on the recipe. Either you're going to add some sort of shortening. You could add butter, which works okay. You could add oil, which also works okay, but it's not as good. Or you could do a fat substitute, do like applesauce or something. But traditional American cake uses either Crisco or lard. Not a lot of people use lard. Mmm. So shortening adds fat as well as emulsifiers, like we talked about eggs, that stabilize the air pockets, that keeps the cake light and fluffy. And then the other thing that Americans use that other countries don't use is cake flour. So we talked about all-purpose flour, we talked about bread flour, another category is cake flour. It is purposely very low gluten flour, so it's not dense, right? So the more gluten you use, the denser the bread or cake. This is super low gluten, and so it makes it very spongy and makes it rise. So when you mix the batter, you need to force the air bubbles into the batter. And you can overmix your batter. Like if you add too many air bubbles, then the air bubbles get too big, and then when you cook it, they collapse. And so the last cake I made, I overmixed the batter. And so it looks good when when it says like mix 2 to 3 minutes, they seriously mean 2 to 3 minutes. If you whip it too much, you add in too much air, you have all these air bubbles, right, but you don't have any gluten in there to stabilize them. You have a little bit of shortening to stabilize them, but then when it goes to bake, they look good coming out of the oven, but then as soon as they cool off, they collapse, and your cupcake has a divot in the top. So, yeah, that's what happened to mine. It looked good when they came out, and then as they cooled off, the air cooled off and got smaller, and the air pockets collapsed, and so my cupcakes look like this. So I just filled it with frosting across the top. I figured it's a big frosting well. That's probably what it's designed for. Peggy didn't complain. No. Extra sugar for her. Now she calls them ice cream. Like everything for dessert is ice cream. So, cakes, cookies, cupcakes, whatever, ice cream. It's all ice cream. Alright, pastries and cookies. Maybe it's too much time. Alright, okay. Alright, so pastry and cookies are more on the dough side. They use almost no water, comparatively, very, very little water. And they use a lot more fat or oil than breads or batters. Because you need it to be crispy, usually. Like you want a cookie that has like a crispy outside and a soft inside. And that's controlled by having little water, lots of fat. Okay, let's see here. I'll do cookies first. Alright, so a traditional cookie is made with some combination of flour, water, sugar, and butter. And you usually make it in two parts. You usually take the flour and whatever else you're going to put in that's dry, let that sit to the side. You take the sugar and you cream it into the butter. Right? So it usually says take your sticks of butter, soften them, throw in your sugar, and like kind of squish it together so that the butter has the sugar caught inside it. So the sugar's creamed with the butter. That step is part of the reason why cookies have kind of crunchy outside. So the butter adds some extra crispiness, and then the sugar is caught in the butter. So it has like a sugary coating, which when sugar cools off, right, it kind of snaps to it. Yeah. It would not be bad. They wouldn't have a crispy outside. They'd be a little more cake-like. Like more cake-like cookies rather than what we consider like cookies that have like a hard outside and a soft inside. Yeah, so the idea is you're supposed to do the sugar and the butter, whip those up together, then slowly add in the dry ingredients. And that adds in some air too when you're whipping it up. So this step adds air, and then the slowly adding in the dry ingredients adds a little more air so they puff up and cool off with it. Alright, since you're not going to add a lot of flour comparatively to a bread or something, you're going to add eggs. Now, not all recipes use eggs, but if not a lot of flour is being used, you'll often have to substitute eggs so that it binds all the gluten together and keeps your cookie from falling apart. Right, in pastry, there are three main types of pastry. There's what's called flaky pastry, which is pie crust. and you're going to have your fat evenly dispersed throughout the dough. So this is a dough where you make the flour water dough, and you add in fat of some sort, butter usually, sometimes Crisco, and you like knead it. You knead it all together so the fat is all mixed up with the dough, so you can't tell what's happening. When baked, right, fat melts at a lower temperature than water boils at. So the fat's going to melt. If you ever looked at a pie crust recipe, it says like bake at like 250 or 300 for 10 minutes to get it set. Just warm enough that the fat melts and like spreads out in between the gluten layers and like lubricates between the layers of gluten. It makes it kind of, I guess when you think of a pie crust, right, it's just little tiny sheets almost. Like a good pie crust, when you break apart the crust, breaks into little tiny fragments. There's something called laminated pastry. We usually call that puff pastry. Puff pastry, you would probably buy this in the fridge. I doubt anyone would make this. What you would do if you wanted to make it is you would mix your flour and water, smidge, tiny little bit of water, just enough to get it wet, and then a bunch of butter. You would knead it out, roll it out, that's one. Roll it on top of itself, roll again, that's two. Roll on top of itself, roll it out. You would do that 729 times. And that's what's considered puff pastry. I don't know who decided 729, but that's the official European standard of puff pastry. No, it's the exact number. But it's true puff pastry, you have rolled it out, flipped it over once. Rolled it out. Well, then you better start over if you're going to make an official puff pastry. For those cooking competitions, they're using, yeah, someone on the side is going with their little clickety thing, right? One. And so if you think about it, right, this is a layer, and the idea is that you're trapping the fat in between the layers. By rolling it out that much, the fat gets trapped in between the gluten layers. And so, apparently, that's a magic puff pastry number. Exactly. If you get 730, you're like, crap.
Is it like the balsamic vinaigrette where you have
It
to
is.
put it in front of the
I don't think it probably is, but I mean, I think if you were doing like one of those on like the Cooking Network, the sugar pastry things, then yeah. Alright. Alright, and the last one's called sheet pastry. Has anyone ever had baklava?
Yeah.
That sheet pastry. You're going to use what's called phyllo dough. Yeah, there's a Greek restaurant in town.
Oh, that was Greek.
Yeah. Alright, so you're going to make a stiff flour water dough. So lots of flour, a little bit of water, and you're going to knead it. So unlike some of these other ones, like the laminated has some kneading, this one has to be kneaded a lot, and then it has to be left to rest overnight. That's what makes a phyllo dough. After it's rested, you're going to roll it super, 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 super thin. to the point where it almost, like, as you roll it, it's almost pulling apart from itself, because it's so thin. That way, when you bake it, it snaps like a cracker. So if you think of your baklava, right, it's kind of like crunchy, crispy layers of stuff in between them. And so that's why the dough is super, super, super thin. So when it's baked, it's like a cracker. One big spoonful. Alright, I will do everything pasta on Monday. Because I have a lot of stuff to talk about pasta. And then we're going to start some generic fruits and vegetables. We got fruits, vegetables, sauces.
There's a question about, like, so when I was doing the class tomorrow at 5 o'clock, how do I set it to the time?
By putting in a letter.